Which of these stories will you be talking about tomorrow? The overnight raid at Occupy Wall Street, the NYPD riots.
What's your name? Daniel.
200 arrested, at least half a dozen journalists, and a New York City councilman bloodied and incarcerated.
We are the 99%! We are the 99%!
Protesters have had 2 months to occupy the park with tents and sleeping bags. Now they will have to occupy the space with the power of their arguments.
But when Occupy gets a restraining order guaranteeing their rights to bring their tents and sleeping bags back, Mayor Bloomberg ignores it until a judge conveniently reverses it.
Things got bailed out. We got kicked out.
The City of New York versus Occupy. The City of New York versus the Constitution of the United States, with witnesses Josh Harkinson of Mother Jones and Ryan Hoffman of Occupy Wall Street, with Occupy attorney Yetta Kurland, with Michael Moore, and with my special comment, Michael Bloomberg, Occupy, and how democracy is protected by the endless stupidity of those who would destroy it.
Make no mistake, the final decision to act was mine and mine alone.
And the words are few, but they grow in number and ring with clarity. Gabby Giffords is back.
So you think to yourself, I'll go back to Congress if I get better.
Yes, yes, yes. Yes.
And that's where you are right now.
Yes, yes. There is a lot to say. I will speak better. I want to get back to work. Representing Arizona is my honor.
All that and my special comment on Occupy now on Countdown. Good evening from New York. This is Tuesday, November 15th, 357 days until the 2012 presidential election, and this is a special edition of Countdown. At this hour, Occupy Wall Street protesters are heading back into Zuccotti Park, minus their tents, their sleeping bags, their kitchen gear, computers, media center, and generators, all with First Amendment rights bloodied but unbowed, courtesy New York Mayor Michael Bloomberg, many with more physical bruises, courtesy the NYPD. The fifth story on the Countdown, Occupy Wall Street cleared from Zuccotti Park overnight in a massive police action, then fighting in court for their right to keep camping there, winning the first round, losing on appeal, yet going forward. The police crackdown beginning about 1 a.m. Eastern Time, an action the New York Times reports was kept secret from all but a few high-ranking officers. Hundreds of police arriving with this message for the more than 200 protesters asleep in their tents.
Camping, the erection of tents and structures, and the storage of personal belongings are prohibited in Zuccotti Park.
Demonstrators had little time to collect that personal property, some say as few as 10 minutes. The NYPD then moving in to clear them out and passing on this message from City Hall.
We'll be able to come back, but without tents. In these cold winter months, they want us to stay here without our tents, so without our protection.
At least 200 arrests reported, more than 140 inside the park, the others on nearby streets. Among those arrested, at least half a dozen journalists and New York City Council member Idanis Rodriguez, who reportedly suffered a head injury at the hands of the police. The councilman only got out of the hoosegow tonight. He issued a statement that itself promises to extend his part of the story into tomorrow. Early this morning, he writes, I was arrested by the NYPD near Zuccotti Park. I had rushed down to the area when I heard that the occupation was being evicted in order to observe as a representative of my community. I committed no offense. I appreciate all the support people have shown today and tomorrow at noon on the steps of City Hall. I will be speaking more on today's events. Turned out of Zuccotti, Occupy Wall Street marched to Foley Square, Manhattan's courthouse district, where State Supreme Court Justice Lucy Billings issued a temporary restraining order against the eviction, an order that should have allowed Occupy Wall Street to return to Zuccotti and remake their camp. Mayor Bloomberg, however, had other ideas, claiming he had intended to let the protesters return by 8 a.m., but was forced to change those plans in order to appeal Justice Billings' restraining order, keeping them out while the city appealed the restraining order and offering this remarkable justification for the mass eviction.
Unfortunately, the park was becoming a place where people came not to protest, but rather to break laws and in some cases to harm others. The First Amendment gives every New Yorker the right to speak out, but it does not give anyone the right to sleep in a park or otherwise take it over to the exclusion of others.
New York's mayor also insisting the protesters were removed peacefully.
There was certainly no serious injuries that we are aware of. People that lay down on the ground, may have banged themselves.
I think the last time that excuse was offered by a public official, it might have come from Bull Connor of Birmingham, Alabama. And Mr. Mayor, on behalf of the city of New York, you can go bang yourself too. Bloomberg also explaining why reporters and camera crews were kept far from the activity.
The police department routinely keeps members of the press off to the side when they're in the middle of a police action. It's to prevent a situation from getting worse and to protect the members of the press.
Protesters waiting for the results of the city's appeal were disappointed. Supreme Court Justice Michael Stallman ruling that their attorneys have not demonstrated that the rules adopted by the owners of the property concededly after the demonstrations began are not reasonable time, place, and manner restrictions permitted under the First Amendment. In short, Brookfield Properties, which owns Zuccotti in a public-private partnership with the city, can make up its own rules for how the property can be used, have the city enforce them, and change them whenever they like, regardless of the protesters' constitutional rights. Support for Occupy Wall Street came from all over, from Occupy Boston.
They just show up at 2 in the morning and just start arresting people. That's terrible.
More practical was the support from Occupy D.C., which tweeted a photo of its members today occupying the Washington offices of the owners of Zuccotti Park, Brookfield Properties. Support also from AFL-CIO President Richard Trumka, who said in a statement that read in part, the Occupy Wall Street movement has been committed to peaceful, nonviolent action from its inception, and it will keep spreading no matter what elected officials tell police to do, but that doesn't mean these raids are acceptable. In fact, they are inexcusable. As for Occupy Wall Street itself,
they tried to evict us from the park, but you can't evict an idea. We're going to keep going, and we're not going to take this as an end, but an opportunity for a new beginning to start anew.
Joining me now, two witnesses to the events this morning at Zuccotti Park. Josh Harkinson, reporter with Mother Jones Magazine. Thanks for coming in, Josh. And Ryan Hoffman will be familiar to our audience as well as a protester with Occupy Wall Street and co-author of the Occupy Wall Street Declaration. Good to see you, sir.
Good to see you.
Where were you when the police arrived at Zuccotti Park, and how did you get the word that the NYPD was massing?
I was actually at home, and I received a text message at about 1 a.m. I jumped out of my bed and hopped in a cab and went down to Zuccotti Park immediately, where the police had already set up barricades around the park, as well as setting up barricades along all different streets, right, block up.
And you, Josh, what got you there, and were you surprised by how much force was there by the time you got there?
Well, I heard my phone exploding in the middle of the night, and I thought somebody had died, but it was actually Occupy Wall Street getting evicted, and so I jumped into Subway and got there as soon as I could. I think it was a half hour maybe, and I met the same barricades, and now I'm a member of the media, and they still wouldn't let me in.
Apparently being a member of the media had very little to do with it, to paraphrase Mae West last night, with 6 arrests of members of the media. How close did you come to being arrested?
Very, very close. Basically I snuck into the park after everybody else had been told to leave, which required climbing under and over barricades and just sort of watching for when the police weren't looking and acting like I deserved to be there. Just kind of walk across the street casually, and there were all these, top brass police officers who were, just hanging out, and I stood there and witnessed some of the final and I think possibly most troubling arrests. And so, that's what I saw, and that's how I got there.
All right, you used the word troubling. Describe what you saw that was particularly troubling.
Well, I was troubled by the fact that these protesters were very peaceful in how they were responding to the police, and yet when the police moved in, they just doused them with pepper spray, just across the board. And I didn't really see any reason for that.
To your knowledge, Ryan, were there warnings about individual uses of force and pepper spray and all the rest of that? Was there adequate time even to pack up anything personal and get it out of there?
No.
How much time do you think that the average protester got?
I would say 10 minutes is being generous.
Were there any warnings relative to the use of pepper spray?
Not that I am aware of, but that doesn't mean that there weren't.
Do you think that there was any incitement in terms of the police, that they had any reason to be as forceful as they were, or was part of the force part of the reason they were there?
I'll put it this way. I was on Broadway, and we were standing there trying to see what was going on. And a few minutes later, there was a rush of a police officer line of about 10 deep, with riot shields, and they pushed us under a scaffolding, and they were headbutting protesters with their helmets in the back and hitting them with their batons when they weren't moving fast enough. Now you're talking about a crowd of people that is packed in close together, shoulder to shoulder. There's nowhere to go, and this, I guess, line of police officers got the order to rush, and they forcefully shoved us into each other. And it was very upsetting to see, because a lot of people felt like they were getting crushed. A lot of people could not breathe. I saw people getting trampled, kicked. It was not pretty.
Give me a read on that same thing, Josh, because in Oakland they had 700 police, and having been through that already, the protesters said, all right, we're going, and there was no attempt to, and take this punishment with you as you leave. It sort of seems as if everybody had simply filed out of Zuccotti Park in alphabetical order, there still would have been violence last night on the part of the police.
I mean, it's hard to say, but I mean, I think that's possible. Like what I said, what I witnessed was a peaceful protest. And then, after I was dragged out of the park physically. And I was there, and there was this man who was pulled out of the park on a stretcher, and he was wearing an oxygen mask, which couldn't have been good. And I tried to go take a photograph of him along with some other members of the press. And as I was approaching the ambulance, a police officer, I was wearing a satchel, and he grabbed the strap of my satchel and swung me around. And I just didn't see a reason for that.
Ryan, one of the things that was made such a big deal about last night were what happened to the possessions, what happened to the Occupy Wall Street library of 5,500 books or more. And they're all, according to the City of New York, safe and sound in a sanitation garage on 57th Street, so it's all right then?
I'll believe it when I see it. Right now, the Occupy Wall Street library has 5 books, so we've got 1,000th of our books back.
Goodness.
That's not the only thing that was taken.
Yeah, go ahead.
The entire medical tent was dismantled while patients were still inside, shredded. I mean, what would happen if someone was leaning up against one of the sides of the tent? They could have had a more serious injury inside the medical tent. I mean, there was patients' records inside there. There was equipment that was donated, expensive equipment that I don't know the whereabouts of now. And if it's in the sanitation department, we haven't seen it yet. So tons of clothes just taken, and there was, I mean, if that's going to happen, 10 minutes is unacceptable.
Ray Kelly, the police commissioner, on the local news tonight, about an hour ago, there will be 4 entrances to Zuccotti Park. Brookfield employees or people they hire enforcing the rules about no lying down, no tarps, few personal possessions. What does that do to the movement? What does that do to the occupation?
Well, I'll tell you something. They wanted to take our generators, so we got bicycle generators. They wanted to take our electricity. We found other ways. We'll find another way to get around this. This isn't going to stop us. This is just going to make us more creative. It's just raising the net a little bit higher to play tennis. That's all.
It has been suggested that given how quickly, and we're going to get into this with Yetta Kurland, how quickly the movement was ready to go to court to get the restraining order today, which it got, that there is a lot more organization than everybody is letting on, that there are, in fact, Plan Bs and Cs and Ds down the road without revealing anything you wouldn't want to reveal. Do you know that to be the case?
Absolutely. I think that the semblance of the General Assembly leads people to believe that we're disorganized, but the sort of organization and existence of working groups that are there to tackle specific problems, such as an eviction, such as to have a plan of what we're going to do if this happens, what we're going to do if that happens. We have plans, A, B, C, D, E, all the way down to Z, I think. So I have to give an incredible amount of credit to the National Lawyers Guild. They had this ready to go right away, and they got us into court right away.
Ryan, give me your sum up what yesterday meant in terms of that, in terms of the entire event. I'm sorry, Josh, you do that for me.
Well, the meaning of the event. I mean, I think that there are different schools of thought on this, but ultimately, I think this is going to make the movement stronger because, there were a lot of things that people were dealing with in the park logistically. There were some social frictions in the park. There were the sanitation issues, just the logistics of camping there. And this has been a huge unifying event for the movement.
I would think so.
And it's really brought these sort of factions of the movement together. And I think that it's also potentially going to bring more people in to some of the actions that they're organizing down the road, like this big November 17th protest coming up.
Josh Harkinson of Mother Jones, Ryan Hoffman of Occupy Wall Street. Great work last night on Twitter and here tonight. Great, thanks for coming in.
Thanks so much, Keith.
Pleasure.
The legal status after today's confused court rulings, the trend of raids against Occupy nationwide, the prospect that the president had a passive hand in all this. Michael Moore on what's next, and my special comment. The pusillanimous ignorance of mental midgets like Mike Bloomberg is one of the great safeguards of our democracy. All I had tonight on Countdown. The judge tells the mayor the protesters must be let back in with their sleeping bags and their tents. The mayor ignores the judge. The mayor then gets another judge to rule his way. One of Occupy's lawyers joins me to explain the legal prestidigitation. 18 mayors on a conference call about what to do about Occupy. So says Oakland's embattled Gene Kwan. Not long after, at least half a dozen protests are rolled up. I'll ask Michael Moore who's responsible. Mr. Moore will invoke the name of a well-known current president and the Division of Homeland Security. The videotape was encouraging. The audio tape is astounding. Congresswoman Gabby Giffords returns to the public eye. All that in my special comment on Bloomberg and the Occupy raid coming up on Countdown. When is a tent just a tent, and when is it a vehicle for freedom of speech? In our fourth story on the Countdown, a judge upholds Mayor Bloomberg's decision to rid Zuccotti Park of Occupy protesters after officials ignore orders from another judge to allow occupiers back into their camp. Late this afternoon, New York State Supreme Court Justice Michael Stallman, yes, he picked that picture, denied the protesters' emergency appeal to return to the park, ruling that protesters have not demonstrated that they have a First Amendment right to remain in Zuccotti Park. Lawyers for the protesters say their First Amendment rights have indeed been violated, and their fight will not end here. Joining me now, one of those fighting on behalf of the protesters, Yetta Kurland, attorney with the National Lawyers Guild. Good to see you again.
Thank you.
Okay, you got a TRO at the crack of dawn this morning, letting the protesters back in with tents, with sleeping bags, with their possessions, and the mayor just ignored it. He claimed it needed clarification. In legal terms, what the hell was that?
Very good question. We got the order signed at about 6:30 this morning. We served it on not only the city, the NYPD, but also Brookfield Properties by 7:50 a.m. And still by 10 a.m., we were not being allowed to bring folks back into the park. And we went, in fact, down to Zuccotti Park and tried to serve it on a number of police officers who literally walked away from us and refused to accept service of a court order by a New York State Supreme Court judge.
Did the city then go judge shopping, or did they lean on somebody? And what is the next legal step in terms of this unfortunate judge who said, well, yeah, it is a little unfortunate that you guys changed the rules on them in the middle of the game, but that really doesn't affect the larger issue of whether or not they get to bring camping gear in?
Yeah, I mean, we don't know what happened behind closed doors. I do know that it has been a long day with a lot of ups and downs. We were certainly very delighted to get the order this morning by Judge Billings, clearly directing the city to recognize the First Amendment rights of the protesters, to allow them back into the city, into the park, along with their belongings. The decision this afternoon was certainly disheartening, and frankly, listen, some decisions are good decisions, some decisions are bad decisions. In my opinion, the decision by Judge Stallman was not a good decision. I'm not sure he understood the finer nuances of the argument regarding First Amendment issues and seemed to kind of skip a track and get preoccupied with this claim by the city that their conduct was mostly because of public safety issues.
Sometime after this all began on the 17th of September, Brookfield Properties issued new guidelines that prohibited, among other things, camping and or the erection of tents or other structures, the placement of tarps or sleeping bags or other covering on the property. Those were not in the restrictions of the use of that public space that's been public space since at least the opening of the World Trade Center 40 years ago. Did the judge this afternoon essentially say they can change those rules, they can retroactively input those rules, no matter what effects they might have on freedom of speech or anybody else's constitutional rights? Is that what he ruled?
It's a confusing decision. He first said it's undisputed that it is a traditional public space,
right.
But then went on to say that in fact they couldn't bring tents and structures onto the premises. And again, I'm not sure that he understood the arguments, and I'm not sure that he understood the broader arching issue of what it means to occupy, and that kind of the 21st century is moving into a new type of social movement.
I quoted Police Commissioner Kelly from a broadcast about 2 hours ago, maybe not only about an hour and a half ago now, who said that there would be Brookfield employees, presumably guards, at 4 entrances to Zuccotti Park who would check everybody, and they've already done this, check people's bags, check people's persons. You'll notice Police Commissioner Kelly is not being checked for anything there. He's just standing around gloating over what happened. But they're going to search people going into a public space. I'm confused, and I don't think it's just because I didn't go to law school. I'm confused by that idea.
Very confusing. And who's giving them what directions? What happens to tourists who happen to have backpacks? Again, we're talking about selective enforcement and some very concerning issues in terms of enforcement of that. So we'll see what happens. You know, as our clients often say, you cannot evict an idea. And I think that, you know, although we were disappointed by the decision by Stallman, there's a lot of options moving forward. It's been an absolute pleasure. It's great to hear the support from the occupiers for the work of the National Lawyers Guild, but in fact we feel very privileged and very honored to be able to represent these folks who are working in Occupy Wall Street.
The final number may vary on this. There's at least 4, probably 6, maybe more journalists. Associated Press, New York Daily News, New York Times, all of them, somebody was arrested from each organization this morning while covering the protests with valid press credentials. The mayor claimed the actions against the media were to protect members of the press. Have we just seen sort of the ultimate violation of freedom of the press? He arrested reporters in the middle of what he believed was illegal action on his part as mayor.
Yeah. And then said that he did it to make the journalists safe.
Right.
I mean, another issue is that, as you reported earlier, Jonas Rodriguez, a New York City council member, where's the mayor saying that he's upset that his own council member has been arrested wrongfully and bloodied in that process? So it really calls into question what the motivations are here. But again, you know, there were some setbacks today, but I think that it is unquestionable that this movement will continue and that folks aren't going away. And again, the thing that I've said at every time I've done this show is that we have repeatedly offered the city to sit down if there really are any types of public health concerns, any other types of concerns. We've always been available to address those issues, but appearing at 1 in the morning with mass evictions, reports that I was hearing of bulldozers with their blades down, going down Broadway with 35 riot gear cops. This is not the way to do that.
You'll get a lot of things perhaps in the courts relative to Michael Bloomberg, but there are 2 things you will not get if he doesn't want them: a meeting and an apology. Yetta Kurland of the National Lawyers Guild, one of the volunteers for the Occupy Wall Street movement. Thanks again, Yetta.
Thank you.
Albany, Oakland, Portland, New York, and others, and Philadelphia and other cities threatened. Detect a pattern here in the last week? Michael Moore does, especially with the president conveniently on his way to Australia. Michael, and then my special comment. The use of unnecessary violence against Occupy protesters across the country has been approved. Who approved it? Where's the president on all this? Michael Moore wants to know. His comments, then my special comment on what happened last night. And then the good news. Her speech is limited, repetitive, but it's still improving on a daily basis. And more importantly, you can tell there is still all of Gabby Giffords intact in there. Coming up. Countdown, the first news hour on cable to seriously cover Occupy Wall Street and the Occupy movement, the longest continuously running 8 p.m. news hour on cable, unless you consider Fox News. We're live each night at 8 p.m. And in our third story tonight, Michael Moore has been visiting Zuccotti Park since the Occupy movement first began there in September. He's also been to some of the other sites across the country that have seen similar police raids in the last 48 to 72 hours, Occupy Oakland and Occupy Portland. For now, he's occupying right here. Michael Moore, author of the new book, Here Comes Trouble. Thank you for coming in, sir.
Thank you for having me on this very important day.
Bloomberg got his court order. No tents, no sleeping bags. You're not involved with them per se, but you're involved with them in a larger sense. What should the occupiers do tonight?
Well, it doesn't really matter much what I say. I think that there's
advice.
Well, there's hundreds of people gathering right now in Lower Manhattan. My first piece of advice, of course, is to always remain peaceful and nonviolent. Our strength comes in our numbers and in our different value system that we have, which is one that does not include violence. So that's my first hope. Secondly, you know, this movement is really driven by young people, and they don't suffer fools like you and I have learned that we have to as we get older, and we learn to, you know, all that. But at that age, And so I will anxiously await their direction as to what to do, because I know, first of all, everybody knew this day would come. And so don't think that there hasn't been a plan B and a plan C and a plan D already afoot here. I mean, for just the fact that Occupy Wall Street was in court at 7:30 this morning to get the temporary restraining order in our favor against Bloomberg, that I think shocked a lot of people that, hey, what happened to all these dirty hippies?
Hippie marijuana smokers sleeping in
they're
all
in court
night.
at 7:30.
Free love.
By 9 a.m. we have a restraining order. So there is quite an operation afoot here with all the various elements involved, and you're going to see this is only going to increase the movement, not only here in New York, but across the country.
But you tweeted, phase 2 of this massive nonviolent majority movement will now commence. Wall Street will wish they had just left it alone in the park. What is phase 2?
Well, if I told you, I would have to, I would have to have you run for mayor.
Oh, Lord.
No, I think people will begin to see, there will be various calls for rallies, demonstrations, but there will be other occupations. The thing is that eventually, within the next few hours or tomorrow, they're going to have to reopen the park because the judge has said it has to be open to the public. Well, the public is going to come back to the park.
Right.
And that includes the protesters. And just as it happened in Oakland, when they moved everybody out of Oakland 2-3 weeks ago, everybody came back. And they had a massive movement this weekend, which I think, I don't know if you've touched on this here on your show, but this is being coordinated by the federal government.
I wanted to ask you about that. Is that yours? Because Oakland was rolled up, Albany was rolled up, Portland was rolled up, New York's been rolled up.
All in the same way.
And poor Jean Quan, the mayor of Oakland, who's like a weather vane in a windstorm out there, admitting she was on a conference call with 18 mayors. This is a plan. Whose plan is it, and who do we assign responsibility to?
Well, there was just a piece that came out from the Minneapolis Examiner a couple hours ago. Where they quote a justice official in the Obama Justice Department who did not want to be identified, but he said that the federal government has been providing logistical and tactical advice and support. They said that it's up to the local law enforcement officer or agencies as to what what to do, but Homeland Security and the Justice Department have been coordinating the sort of advice and strategy and tactics of this, so that because you've seen all the tactics of the police have been the same in every city in terms of how they've done this in the last 48 hours. So this is not some coincidence. This was planned, and I think the question really has to be asked of the federal government and of the Obama administration: why? Why are you participating in this against a nonviolent mass movement of people who are upset at what Wall Street and the banks have done to their lives?
Conveniently, the president can't be asked that question because he was en route to Australia. On the plane, Air Force One, the Associated Press quoted the press secretary, and this is their story. They don't have direct quotes from the press secretary, but he said, in essence, the president hopes the right balance can be reached between protecting freedom of assembly and speech, with the need to uphold order and safeguard public health and safety, because obviously the bubonic plague and all the Occupy protests was beginning to get to be a problem when we lost the entire state of Minnesota or whatever he thinks happened. And they added this in the story: the administration's position is that each municipality has to make its own decisions about how to handle these issues. So Mr. Obama is basically saying what through his press secretary here? You're on your own?
Yes, but he's also saying he wants it both ways. His administration is obviously helping them to stymie this movement because, look, no politician, regardless of what party they're in, wants the people to suddenly be in charge. For the power to shift from those who are the elected officials to the people who elected them, which is actually the way it's supposed to be, that's a frightening thought. So I can understand why they're inclined to do that. They're no different than any other politician. But because of my support of President Obama, I expect more of him, and I don't expect his Justice Department and his Homeland Security Department to be helping to coordinate the destruction of this movement. Because first of all, you can't destroy it. So stop, because the majority of Americans want taxes raised on the rich. The majority of Americans don't believe that you didn't go far enough on health care. You go down the whole list, and the majority now is very much behind the principles of the Occupy movement.
And the practicalities of it. There's a poll this afternoon, New York State public opinion poll. 58% of New York State residents, that's from Albany to Zuccotti Park, A to Z, say that no matter how they feel about what's being protested, the protesters have the right to continue the protest, and they have the right to stay overnight in public parks.
Yes.
So not just they're against Wall Street or they're communist or but just the idea of they have the right to be there is overwhelmingly supported in the state in which this has now most recently happened.
That is correct, and I believe that you would find that in most states across the country because people are just happy that somebody has started this. Somebody has gotten up. And again, thank God that it's been young people that have said, you have stolen our future, and we want it back. And we're not gonna settle for anything less.
Just before the raid, the editors of Adbusters, which is the magazine that basically was behind the organization of the Occupy movement, suggested it might be time for the protesters to, quote, declare victory and scale back before winter sets in. A, is that a victory, therefore? And B, did they just, the actions last night, did they just revitalize a movement that was maybe thinking of hibernation for a little while?
No, I think it has completely revitalized it, and I think you're going to see more of this in the coming weeks. It's odd, this magazine that you refer to is in Canada.
Yeah.
It's odd for Canadians to be worrying about the winter. So I don't quite know where they're coming from.
They're worried about us worrying about the winter.
Oh, I see. Well, that's very Canadian.
Isn't it?
They're worried about it.
That's right.
They're very kind, and
they're not used to it down there.
Yeah. No, well, they don't need to worry. I think that you're going to see actions throughout the winter, and I think you're going to see various kinds of actions. This is going to take many forms, in part because there is no, quote, organization or leader of this. That means anybody watching this at home tonight, anybody here who's in their living room, you're sitting in Dubuque, you can start this movement. You can start Occupy Dubuque. You have our permission. There's no permission.
No copyright.
There's no permission to get, and that may mean something different in Dubuque than what it means in Des Moines.
Yeah.
So there you go.
Michael Moore, the book is titled Here Comes Trouble, which is a prophetic title right now on another subject. Thanks for coming in. Safe travels.
Thank you, and thank you.
Nice the story it was only yesterday. Our hero, Mayor Mike Bloomberg, next. The remarkable recovery of and the message to her constituents from Gabby Giffords coming up. First, as promised, a special comment on the events of Monday night at Occupy Wall Street at Zuccotti Park. For the entirety of the life of our nation, democracy has been protected, not merely by the strenuous efforts of those of us who cherish it, but mostly and most profoundly by the limitless stupidity of those who would ration it, keep it for themselves and themselves alone, or destroy it. The protests that ended the war in Vietnam reached critical mass only in 1970, when Governor James Rhodes of Ohio pounded on a desk at a news conference and called the student protesters at Kent State University un-American. They were not un-American, they were unarmed, and the next day 4 of them were shot and killed by the National Guard. And 10 days later, 2 more were killed at Jackson State. Those protests had themselves only gone mainstream 20 months earlier, when Mayor Richard Daley of Chicago overreacted with mindlessness and sadism to the massing of demonstrators outside the 1968 Democratic Convention, and the whole world watched. A century of the institutionalized, codified, legalized pseudo-slavery that had followed the real thing was fatally stricken only when Governor George Wallace of Alabama used his inaugural address to promise segregation now, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever. Within 2 years came the marches on Selma and the atrocities at the Edmund Pettus Bridge. And 10 weeks after the first violence, the president had proposed the Voting Rights Act to Congress. The mounting paranoia of 3 decades of the scapegoating of and fear-mongering about liberals only ended when its last white knight self-destructed on the national stage of televised hearings, when Joe McCarthy questioned the loyalty of the U.S. military, and towards one junior attorney he revealed the depths of his cruelty and megalomania, and he revealed that at long last he indeed had no shame. Pick any moment in our history. Our history is a country founded by and invigorated by and reinvigorated by protest. And you will find men like George Wallace and Joe McCarthy and Jim Rhodes and Richard Daley. Go back further to men like the owners of the Triangle Shirtwaist Company, or the officials who sent the police to the Haymarket Square and the troops to the Pullman town, or John Brown, or George Grenville, the British politician who had a bright idea about the American colonies, an idea called the Stamp Act. American freedom has not flourished in spite of these morons of history. It has flourished because of them, because they overreacted, because they underthought, overreached, understood. We owe them our traditions of protest. We owe them our freedoms. We owe them our very independence. None of them ever understood that, around these parts anyway, suppression always creates the opposite of the effect desired. Such a man is Michael Rubens Bloomberg, mayor of New York City, and as of today, the most valuable, the most essential, the most irreplaceable man inside the Occupy movement. Who else but a cliche like Bloomberg could take a protest beginning to grow a little stale around its edges and vault it back into the headlines, complete with mortifying scenes of police dressed up as stormtroopers carrying military weapons using figurative bazookas to kill figurative mosquitoes? Who else but an archetype like Bloomberg could claim a group of protesters was making too much noise in a residential area and then choose to try to disperse them by bringing out LRAD audio cannons, machines that send painful waves of sound indiscriminately over the very same residential area? Who else but a cartoon like Bloomberg could have become rich, creating a multi-billion-dollar media and news company, and then authorize illegally preventing reporters from witnessing police actions he claimed were utterly legal, and then authorize the arrest of 4 reporters at a church? Who else but a human platitude like Bloomberg could have just gotten back from Jerusalem and the dedication of a $10 million medical facility for which he generously paid, and then enabled the image of policemen seizing 5,500 books from the Occupy Wall Street library and throwing them in a dumpster as if the cops were book burners? Who else but a hypocrite like Bloomberg could have overridden by backroom deal with the New York City Council the results of 2 separate referendums, limiting those in his office to just 2 terms as mayor so he could serve a 3rd term, and then have had his police arrest, beat up, and incarcerate a member of the New York City Council? Who else but a putz like Bloomberg could have insisted that protesters were not above the rule of law, and yet when the courts ruled he could not seize the protesters' tents and sleeping bags, nor kick them out of Zuccotti Park, nor keep them from returning with their tents and sleeping bags? Who else could have stalled for hours until he could find another judge to give him the ruling he insisted upon? Who else but the epitome of tone deafness that is Bloomberg could have better illustrated the fundamental issue of Occupy when he puts the entire weight of the most people-driven city in the history of the earth behind already crushingly rich and their efforts to grab themselves still more advantages from those people? And he himself is the 12th richest man in America. Who else but a publicity addict like Bloomberg could have enabled the arrest of 700 protesters on the Brooklyn Bridge, and yet 2 months later, frozen 20 square miles of New York City in gridlock traffic over 2 days so somebody could film another goddamned Batman movie on the 59th Street Bridge, leading to the inescapable conclusion that if you want to tie up a little traffic during a protest for equality and freedom from corporate domination on a bridge in New York City, you will be arrested. But if you want to tie up all the traffic during a goddamned movie shoot for the financial benefit of corporate domination, the city of New York will embrace you and give you tax breaks. Michael Bloomberg, no such a figure, no such a living, breathing embodiment of all that is wrong and all that is stupid in the establishment in this country could be ordered up from the works of fiction or the casting calls of that goddamn Batman movie they filmed the weekend before he ordered the raid on Occupy Wall Street. Obviously, Mayor Bloomberg, you should resign, and your little bully of a police commissioner, Raymond Kelly, should go with you. You have overstepped all reasonable interpretations of your rights and responsibilities, and you have made Americans and people around the world realize that you are simply smaller, more embarrassing versions of the tin pot tyrants who have fallen around the globe in the past year. But as some of us first thought you might be back on that fateful September afternoon that sadistic cops pepper sprayed 4 women who had already been trapped inside a police overreaction, and as we thought again the following weekend during the arrests on Brooklyn Bridge, Michael Bloomberg, you have now indeed become the symbol of the Occupy movement. You are ready to take your historic place with Mayor Daley and Governor Wallace and Senator McCarthy and Prime Minister Grenville and every other idiot who has made the fateful and fatal mistake of thinking that just because he had power and money, that this was a nation in which everything has a price tag on it. We need you, Michael Bloomberg. We need you to keep making these mistakes. Tone-deaf, sensibility-offending, world-changing mistakes like the pepper spray and the Brooklyn Bridge and the paramilitary assault on Occupy Wall Street last night. Hell, Mike, the freedoms of this wonderful and transcendent nation corrupted by the endless greed of you and the other dozen richest people in it, and the corporations who nevertheless have still managed to own you somehow. These freedoms will not be restored to us in just the next 2 years. I'm endorsing you for a 4th term. Your nation needs you, Mr. Mayor. Occupy needs you. Bloomberg now, Bloomberg tomorrow, Bloomberg forever. It has been 311 days since Jared Loughner opened fire in Tucson, wounding Congresswoman Gabby Giffords. A lot of work, a lot of frustration has gone on behind the scenes, but in our number 1 story, the remarkable and uplifting words of Gabby Giffords spoken for the first time in public. On January 8th, Congresswoman was meeting with members of her constituency, as you know, outside a supermarket when a crazed gunman approached her and shot her point blank in the head. 19 people were shot that day. 6 of them died. Some news outlets had reported that Gabby Giffords herself had died, but she survived and battled back, beginning with a simple act of grasping her husband's hand. Then came larger victories. Her ability to speak returned. She was able to stand up and walk. And in her most public triumph, she returned to Capitol Hill during the summer to cast her vote in favor of the debt ceiling agreement. In an interview with Diane Sawyer, we saw not only how far she had progressed physically in the 10 months since the shooting, but perhaps most remarkably, how she has not lost her eternal optimism.
Do you ever get angry at what happened to you?
No. Life.
And so you think to yourself, I'll go back to Congress if I get better.
Yes.
As further proof of her dedication to return to Congress, perhaps late Monday night, Gabby Giffords released a minute-long recorded message to her constituents. Her words are slow and deliberate. The inflections, the volume control are inconsistent, but her mind and her resolve are as strong as ever.
Hello, this is Gabby Giffords. I miss you. I miss Tucson. The mountains, blue skies, even the heat. I'm getting stronger. I'm getting better. It's been a hard year for all of us. Thinking about that day makes me sad. 6 people died. 6 innocent people. So many people's hurt. There is a lot to say. I will speak better. I want to get back to work. Representing Arizona is my honor. My staff is there to help you. They keep me informed on your behalf. I miss you. I miss home. I'll see you real soon. Thank you.
One of the world's leading brain injury therapists who's worked with Gabby says she's improved even since all that was recorded. And frankly, right now, if most members of Congress made a radio address to their constituents that was that well read, they would be complimenting themselves on having done a pretty good job. Welcome back, Gabby Giffords. That's Countdown. I'm Keith Olbermann. Good night and good luck.